Welcome, SENS Talk.
Russell winds in, feeds it back across the track and scores! Brady Tkachuk makes it 2-0. Paul Giroux, hit alone, scores!
Tim Stutzel across, Tkachuk score! The captain, Brady Tkachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go, SENS, go. Welcome to SENS Talk. My name is Brandon Plant, and I am your host. Today, I have a very, very special video for all of you as I preview this year's Ottawa Senators trade deadline. We have a lot to get into, but before we get into all of that, I want to say thank you to all of you that have nominated us for 5 different nominations at this year's Ottawa Awards. Last year, we had multiple nominations as well, and we actually won one. We won the best YouTube channel in Ottawa in 2023. So just like last year, it's an absolute honor to just be nominated. The recognition is unbelievable. Thank you all so very, very much for that. But you know what? Just like last year, once you're nominated, you might as well win this thing. So if you wanted to vote for us, you can do so by clicking the link in the description and comment section down below. We really, really appreciate it. We're up for 5 different nominations. More information on that down below. And yeah, besides that, that's enough rambling about that. Let's get into the trade deadline preview. So for this video, I want to break it down into 2 different parts. The first part will be about players that are untouchable. The players that are not going to be dealt anytime soon, particularly at this year's deadline. And then after that, I want to take a look at players that realistically do have a somewhat or a pretty good chance of being dealt at the deadline. So let's take a look firstly at the untouchables. The players that have absolutely no doubt at this deadline, or frankly in the offseason, or anytime soon, to be dealt by your Ottawa Senators. Now, we've already seen it on social media. Crazy trade proposals about trading Ottawa's captain, Brady Tkachuk. Even people saying we should trade Tim Stützle. All that is nonsense. None of that's going to happen. My untouchables are very simple. The captain, Brady Tkachuk, is not going anywhere anytime soon. He's the player that Steve Staios says they're trying to build around. He's an untouchable. Tim Stützle, 90 points last year, 1 goal off of 40 goals. This guy is a superstar forward, Ottawa's first superstar forward in over a decade, okay? So for Ottawa, there's no reason to trade a young superstar center on one of the best value contracts in the National Hockey League. In a down year, still producing at a point-per-game pace. That is not happening. So those two, even... I know there's not a lot of Sens fans suggesting it, but the fact that there are some, I find ridiculous. There's no chance those 2 players are dealt. In that same boat is Jake Sanderson. No chance he's dealt. Just signed an 8-year, $8 million deal. He's not going anywhere, and for good reason. He's a solid, elite defenseman, going to be starring this league for years and years to come. And if the offense continues to come and, continue to develop, this guy can win a Norris or 2 in his career, no doubt. Now, the 2 players that I have in the untouchables that are not totally untouchable like those top 3 guys I just mentioned, the real core pieces of this team. That would be Shane Pinto and Riley Gregg. They're untouchable for a very simple reason. No team is going to trade young centers that they've developed and drafted with high draft picks like Pinto, who's essentially a first-round pick, and Riley Gregg, who was a first-round pick. No team's going to trade players like that. And Ottawa has literally no reason to trade them. There's no reason to trade Shane Pinto, who sure will get a nice little payday this offseason with a contract extension. But same with Riley Gregg. There's no reason to trade both of them. They're not making a lot of money, and more so, they bring so much value to this team that unless you're getting a ridiculous offer, there's really no reason to trade them. Now, with that, there are some players, a part of the core, that could potentially be dealt in the offseason. So this is where I want to talk about big names that could potentially be shopped, but more so in the offseason. That's more of an offseason type of move, not a trade deadline last-minute type of move. Those guys include guys like Thomas Chabot, Josh Norris, Artem Zub, and Drake Batherson. Now, with Tom Chabot, the main reason for this is Ottawa will have to pick between Chabot and Jacob Chychrun. That's not up for debate. There's only 2 teams in the National Hockey League that have 2 defensemen making $8 million. That's the Ottawa Senators and the New York Rangers. For the Rangers, it's Trouba and Fox. And of course, for Ottawa, it's Chabot and Sanderson. Sanderson is not going anywhere. Chabot probably is not going anywhere. But if they do have to pick between those 2 and they pick Chabot, he could be shipped out. I do doubt it, though. This is the longest tenured Senator on this roster. He's been here for so long. He was the first guy to commit long-term to this franchise. I highly doubt he will be dealt, on top of the fact that he's a leader in that room. Now, Josh Norris has less security, I'll be honest with you. Obviously, will not be dealt this trade deadline. probably will not even be dealt in the offseason, but it's definitely a possibility. The injuries don't help, but that cap hit certainly doesn't help either, and when Ottawa is looking to sign guys, like I already mentioned, Shane Pinto, but as well, they're already at the cap ceiling. The cap will go up. Buyouts will be coming off the books. But the Ottawa Senators will want to have some cap space. So, if they don't want to trade Chychrun or Chabot, Josh Norris suddenly becomes the odd man out. I'm not exactly advocating the trade for Josh Norris, but you know what? At the end of the day, one of these guys will have to be dealt. It could be Josh Norris. And on that note about the injury, it's such an unfortunate injury. Another shoulder injury. So, that definitely taints his value. In a hypothetical scenario where he's dealt. But to people that say that contract scares teams off of Josh Norris, we've seen reports that teams were calling on Josh Norris just before this injury happened in the last couple of weeks. I think David Pagnotta of the Fourth Period was the one reporting that. So Josh Norris is still a very valuable piece. So, like I mentioned, Chabot, Norris, Chychrun, in my opinion, one of those three will have to be dealt to make it work under the cap. Now, I mentioned briefly Artem Zub and Drake Batherson. I mentioned that because, look, I don't think either of them will be dealt. I personally wouldn't deal them unless, you got an incredible offer. Because if you deal Zub or you deal Drake Batherson, you're creating a hole in your lineup, which of course hurts when Ottawa is already a bit thin, as we'll see when I talk about players we might be dealing. Cough, cough, Vladimir Tarasenko. But more so, these are valuable contracts. Drake Batherson is on a hell of a contract, really a bargain to be honest with you, and same with Artem Zub. So with Artem Zub, you can tell I'm a fan of him. He's one of the only true defensive defensemen this Ottawa Senator team has. You're not going to trade that guy when Ottawa is already struggling defensively. On top of the fact he's one of the only true right-handed shot guys as well, and on a decent contract, a fan favorite. It's just not going to happen. But I put him there because, look, if they want to shake things up, and they get a crazy offer for Artem Zub, they obviously will entertain it. He's not a core piece like a Tkachuk or a Sanderson, but I just don't really see that happening. I don't really see the reason to trade him. Similar with Batherson, especially if we trade a guy like Tarasenko, which we'll talk about later in this video. Ottawa's going to have a massive, massive hole in that top nine, particularly on the wings. So Drake Batherson on a hell of a bargain deal. He's having, frankly, it looks like to be a career year for him. He's really having a great year. So for Drake Batherson, he's a bit of a streaky goal scorer. He has 4 goals in his last 5 games. Had 4 goals in a row. Didn't score Saturday in that loss to Philadelphia. But he's a player that you want to keep around. He's great on the power play. He's a true scoring winger that can play make as well. So once again, similar to Artem Zub, if you get an incredible offer, you obviously entertain it, but otherwise there's really no reason to trade Drake Batherson. He's a bargain deal in a position of need. So besides that, let's get to the players who might be dealt and who likely will be dealt. So now let's take a look at players who might be dealt or likely will be dealt at this year's trade deadline. As I've already mentioned a couple of times, this player, I really don't want to mention this player in this context. In an ideal world, you keep everybody, but in the world of the cap, you just can't do it. I'm, of course, talking about Jacob Chychrun. As I've already mentioned a couple of times, he might be the odd man out between Norris and Chabot. You're going to have to pick between 2 out of 3 of those guys. I know the cap space is rising soon. I know buyout money is coming off the books. But you got contract extensions coming up. You have a lot of decisions to make in the future. And you just want to have cap space as well. You want to have that flexibility. So for Ottawa, they're going to have to pick between 2 out of those 3 players. I've already listed why Norris and Chabot might not be dealt. And for Chychrun, a big reason he won't be dealt is, look, he's a solid two-way game. He's a fantastic player. He's a young defenseman, 25 years old. He plays on the left and right-handed side, so he has tremendous value. He can play on both sides. He's still young. He's a solid two-way game. And as I've already mentioned, he's young, but he's experienced. He's played nearly 500 games in the National Hockey League. He's an established player, and literally at this time last year, he was the top trade piece at the trade deadline, so it kind of sucks. He's back in the conversation, but for good reason, because Jacob Chychrun is a fantastic defenseman. And, when you're competing with guys like Chabot and Norris to potentially be dealt, there's really no easy solution. All 3 of those players are fantastic players. So, obviously, he has a solid two-way game. But another reason that the Sens might be hesitant to trade him and might elect to keep him is he has local ties as well. Ottawa always loves to keep local guys around. He also has a valuable contract for the next year and a half. Not so much, really important for this year for Ottawa, but for next year, certainly a valuable and asset to have if you're keeping a guy like Jakob Chychrun around. And as well, if you trade him, there will be a hole that you'll have to fill. So I could see a scenario where Ottawa keeps Jakob Chychrun over Thomas Chabot because he might make less money. I frankly think he will. In his next contract extension, he'll be making more than $6 million. I don't think he'll be making more than $8 million, though. So it's certainly a possibility that he stays, but at the same time, it's a possibility he doesn't. So I think this is a decision that goes beyond just the immediate future. This is the long-term future of the Ottawa Senators we're talking about. And when the Ottawa Senators identify their core pieces, then they can make the decision on a player like Jakob Chychrun, which is why I put him in the might be dealt category and not the likely will be dealt category. Because he might be dealt. Elliot Friedman is saying that, teams are inquiring on the defenseman, which makes sense. He's not untouchable. If a great trade offer comes in, you obviously have to entertain it. But, at the same time for Ottawa, this is a decision that likely will not be made now. It will be made in the offseason. This is why I don't think he'll be dealt now. But at the same time, if they do deal him now, it would be at a time where he has the highest potential value, because for any team trading for him, they would have 2 playoff runs with him at a cap hit at $4.6 million. That is tremendous value on top of the fact this year alone, 59 games played, 9 goals, 22 assists, 31 points, 12 of those on the power play. He's a power play quarterback who could play a solid two-way game in your top 4. He would be a boost for any playoff team or a cup contention team. So in that retrospect, it makes sense for Ottawa if they want to get the best value and they've already identified Chychrun as a type of player they're not keeping around long term, then yeah, it makes sense to trade him when his value is at an all-time high. But at the same time, I don't think his value is going to drop that much from now into the offseason. The only real reason you trade him now is because he has those 2 playoff runs. But frankly, if Ottawa trades him in the offseason, that probably comes with an extension similar to DeBrincat. So you know what? And not similar to DeBrincat in the way of he wants out. Chychrun does not want out. There's been no reason to think that. But more so in the way that he's going to want an extension. If he's getting traded somewhere, he'll likely want to negotiate an extension with that team. So once again, I do think this is more likely an offseason type of move where the Senators management can really evaluate the entire core, the entire roster, and pick out who they want to keep and who they have to deal or who they want to deal. So for Jakob Chychrun, this is a defenseman that is definitely generating interest. He potentially will be dealt, but I wouldn't put my money on it. I think this is a trade that happens in the offseason, but we'll see what happens. Now with that, let's take a look at the few players that likely will be dealt at this year's trade deadline. Now, there are a few players that Ottawa likely will be dealing at this year's trade deadline, but make no mistake about it, compared to previous trade deadlines for the Ottawa Senators, especially in the last few years, this will be a far more quiet deadline in my opinion. The main piece that they're likely or frankly going to be dealing is Vladimir Tarasenko, the right winger who's 32 years old. Oh, I don't want to trade Vladdy. I do not want to trade Vladdy. He's been so good for Ottawa this year. In 57 games, he scored 17 goals, 24 assists for 41 points, 8 of those on the power play for a 14.7 shooting percentage, and 4 game-winning goals as well, including a last-second game winner against San Jose this year in Ottawa at home. That really got the fans fired up. That was an incredible one there against San Jose. And he's been a fantastic fit here in Ottawa. I can't say it enough. Vladimir Tarasenko has been an unreal fit here in Ottawa, but he's unlikely to extend for a multitude of reasons, primarily because, you know what? I don't think Ottawa is going to be able to give him the money he wants. And more so for Vladimir Tarasenko, I think he's looking for a multiple-year extension. I think Ottawa can't give him the money he wants, and I don't think they can give him the term he wants either. So that's what's really stopping him, because otherwise, he seems to like it here. He has his family here. They seem to be loving it here. They're in school. They've really taken to the community very well. And he's been an unreal fit for the Ottawa Senators on and off the ice. This is one of those veteran players the Ottawa Senators are desperately looking for. So the fact we're likely going to be dealing him is a major blow for this team. So, for Ottawa, it's primarily because he's a free agent at the end of the year, and while he might come back in the offseason, maybe he signs here, who knows? Frankly, the reality is that's not a guarantee, frankly, not even a likely scenario, especially if he's traded, right? So, it's already been reported he is waiving his no-trade clause as well to pursue a trade. There are multiple teams involved, including teams like Edmonton and Vegas. So this guy seems to be on his way out. He's also switched agents, which is usually a sign of a player looking to lock down a major contract extension. So once again, he could come back in the summer. I don't think he will, though. He probably will sign with the team he's dealt to. Maybe the Rangers might be a team he gets dealt to, but Vegas, as I already mentioned, Edmonton, there are teams that he can go to that he might sign with for another cup chase for him. But, once again, it would make sense for Ottawa to deal him in a buyer's market where they can get a tremendous return for him. We're talking a first-round pick and a player or a prospect. It's a great return for a player who they signed in the, offseason as a free agent. Didn't, trade anything to get the guy, and you're going to get a hell of a return for him. So for Ottawa, in a buyer's market, it makes sense, especially when the alternative is losing Tarasenko for nothing. So for Ottawa, it makes sense. It just sucks because Ottawa desperately needs a veteran scoring winger, and they're losing one with Vladimir Tarasenko. I'm still holding out hope he might want to sign here in the offseason, but once again, if he's getting traded to a team, he's switching agents, I expect an extension with the team he's traded to, but we shall see. We'll keep an eye on that. But the big thing about this for me is we can potentially use that first-round pick we potentially can acquire for Vladimir Tarasenko in a package to acquire an established scoring winger. We have 3 first-round picks if we get a first-round pick for Tarasenko in this year's draft. I would definitely package one of those first-round picks to acquire an established scoring winger that can play on that right side for 2-3 years. So losing Tarasenko would be a massive loss, will create a massive hole, but the return could help fill that hole. So for any team acquiring Vladimir Tarasenko, they're getting a goal scorer that can play on their first power play wave, a guy that has had a fantastic year, 41 points in 57 games, playing good amount of the time on the third line is very impressive. And for Vladimir Tarasenko, he's had a very impressive year all around. And for any team, especially in the playoff race, when you can acquire a veteran player who's won a Stanley Cup and has a lot of respect around the National Hockey League, you do it. So for a team acquiring him, this is a hell of a get for them. And for the Ottawa Senators, it's a hell of a loss. Now, another player they might shop and likely is on the way out is Erik Brannstrom. The right-handed defenseman is 24 years old. He's played in 53 games this year, scoring 3 goals, 10 assists for 13 total points. He also has 73 blocks in this season as well, with just under 16 minutes of ice time on average. Now, the big reason Ottawa will likely trade Erik Brannstrom, similar to Vladimir Tarasenko, is he only has 1 year left on the deal. He is a free agent after the season, and he's been looking for a multiple-year deal for a couple years now. Bruce Garriock, when he joined our show a couple years ago, mentioned that Brannstrom was looking for 3 to 4 years on a deal, and Ottawa was not willing to do that. They signed him that year for another 1 year contract, and then this offseason they did the exact same thing, only a 1 year contract extension. So they haven't shown, that commitment to extend Erik Brannstrom. They've said no, frankly, 2 times now to extend him long term. So it's clear that the organization sees this guy as an expendable piece that is not a piece for the long-term future of the franchise. Elliot Friedman also reports that there's been increased interest in the young defenseman that we acquired for Mark Stone. So if Ottawa doesn't really have any intention of, signing this guy long-term, it does make sense to let him go to another team, especially when his value is increasing. And especially when the alternative is losing him for nothing. He's a very, very underrated defenseman, and he's solid on the penalty kill too. He averages 130 or so on the penalty kill every game, which is very, very high. So for a guy a few years ago who had a very negative reputation around the league as a guy that can't play defense as a defenseman, he's completely turned that around. He has a very solid defensive game. 73 blocks is nothing to scoff at. On top of the fact he can play a very good amount of penalty kill time and can also contribute once in a while. This is a guy that could be on your power play for sure. If a team needs a guy to fill in or needs a guy to step up, Erik Brannstrom could be that guy. So for Ottawa, it just seems like there's no real spot here for him. He's a guy that really could get an opportunity on another team. Maybe not, for this playoff team he's going to be dealt to. But in the future, wherever he ends up, he could potentially be on a second pairing, getting much more offensive opportunities, and I think he'd flourish. So it's unfortunate that he likely will be dealt by Ottawa, but it looks like it would be the best for both parties to move on, and Ottawa probably can get a pretty decent return for the defenseman as well, especially in a buyer's market where Elliot Friedman is reporting the interest on him has picked up. Now, the last player I want to mention is a player that many of you probably have forgot, unless we're talking about trades, is Dominic Kubalik, the 28-year-old winger, has been on the fourth line nearly the entire year on the left wing side. He's played 55 games this year, scoring 9 goals, 4 assists for 13 points. He does have 2 game-winning goals this year, which I found really interesting, but he's a minus 23, which says it all. He's been terrible this year. He's been non-existent. Frankly, I've forgotten he's existed many times when watching the Ottawa Senators. Last game in the loss to the Philadelphia Flyers on Saturday night, He got an assist, his first point in over 20 games. And the only reason he got a point on that goal for Tom Chabot in the last couple of minutes is because he fanned on the shot and it went to Chabot. So it's not exactly like he earned that point either. So, for Ottawa and for Dominik Kubalik, I think it's best for both sides to move on. I don't know if he wants to be here, but it's definitely the best for both parties to have a change of scenery for Dominik Kubalik. On top of the fact that, like Tarasenko and Brandstrom, he is a free agent after the season. He probably, most definitely, will not be re-signing with Ottawa from the body language and the way he's played here and the way Jacques Martin has been giving him minimal ice time except for power play time. So, he's gone for sure. Ottawa's been shopping him for quite some time. They haven't gotten a lot of interest on the winger that we acquired in the Alex DeBrincat trade, but I think, frankly, a fringe playoff team, like, I don't know, the Washington Capitals or something, a team on the outside looking in, or even a team that's in the playoffs, like the Nashville Predators, for example, I think these teams that are on the cusp or fighting for their playoff spots, that's a team that could acquire Dominik Kubalik with a late round pick. He offers a solid shot for those teams in their bottom six and on their second power play unit. So he definitely has some value. He has a very good shot. But I primarily think for a team that's on the fringes, it makes sense to acquire a guy like Dominik Kubalik for a late round pick. Often teams do that. They want to look competitive for their fan base and as well provide a little bit of a boost for the locker room to show that locker room they're, going all in, so to speak, and pushing for the playoffs. So Kubalik will probably be one of those players that's dealt for a late round pick. That often happens at the deadline. Look at Zach Sanford, for example, right? So he hasn't gotten a lot of interest. He hasn't been good, so it makes sense. But I do expect him to be dealt one way or the other on Friday at the deadline. So besides that, let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. A lot of players we just went through. Do you agree with the players I mentioned? And more so, do you agree with the players I mentioned as untouchable players that will never be dealt? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And besides that, I will see you all soon. Go Sens, go.